The personnel files slammed against the conference table. Richard Dawson stood at the head of the room, holding it up like a trophy, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. Are we really paying this guy to look at codes? He let the words hang thick, making sure every executive in that room heard him clearly. $800,000 a year to sit in an office and stare at spreadsheets. 12 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I kept my hands flat on the table, willing them not to shake. This was my execution, and Richard was enjoying every second of it. I've been here 3 weeks, he continued, pacing now like a prosecutor making closing arguments. 3 weeks, and I can already identify the inefficiencies bleeding this company dry. This position, Senior Compliance Analyst, he said my title like it was a punchline. This is exactly the kind of bloated role that looks good on paper, but delivers zero measurable value. I'm Edward Vance. I'd spent 6 years at Pinnacle Holdings, catching the mistakes that would have buried this company. 6 years of reading contracts until my eyes burned, finding the clauses everyone else missed, flagging the deals that looked golden but were actually landmines. And Richard Dawson, who'd been highs barely long enough to learn wise the bathrooms were, was reducing my entire career to looking at codes. Edward Hayes makes more than some of our department heads, Richard said, warming to his audience. Stephen Brooks, our CFO, was watching carefully. Maria, my boss, looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. And what's his output? Reports nobody reads. Emails about theoretical problems. Warnings about disasters that somehow never actually happen. Maria tried to cut in. Richard, if you look at Edward's actual track record over the past 6 years, he waved his off like he was a mosquito. I've reviewed the track record. Lots of activity, lots of busy work. What I don't see is concrete ROI. What I don't see is a single catastrophe he's actually prevented. Because those catastrophes he's always warning about, they never materialize. Maybe because they were never real in the first place. That's when I snapped. I've been up since 4 that morning finishing my analysis of the Vertex Solutions acquisition. My daughter Sophia had been sick with a fever for 3 days. My son Oliver needed help preparing for his debate tournament. My husband Elena was holding our family together with duct tape and prayer while I worked 16-hour days, and I was done being diplomatic. Section 12, subsection 4 of the Vertex acquisition, I said. My voice cut through the room, steady and cold. The earn-out structure directly contradicts the indemnification language and breach of fiduciary duty. If we close this deal tomorrow as planned, we're exposed to liability that could exceed $2 billion. Richard's grin got wider. He actually looked delighted. $2 billion? Everyone hear that? $2 billion? Let me get this straight. Edward, you're telling me that our legal team missed this problem? That the 3 external advisory firms we paid millions to review this deal missed it? That Vertex's own attorneys missed it? But you, sitting in your office with your highlighters and your spreadsheets, you found the smoking gun nobody else could see. Yes. The single word landed like a challenge. Richard laughed, and a few people around the table shifted uncomfortably. Stephen leaned forward, interested despite himself. What's the specific exposure, Edward? I'd been waiting for someone to actually ask. I pulled up my laptop, calling up the analysis I'd sent to the deal team 3 times already. Vertex's revenue reporting methodology doesn't align with their actual contract structure. They're classifying one-time project fees as recurring subscription revenue to inflate their growth metrics. When we reconcile their books post-acquisition using standard accounting principles, their earn-out performance triggers will fail. The indemnification clause as currently written allows them to claim, we deliberately sabotage their operations to avoid the earn-out payout. The earn-out is structured at $400 million over 3 years. Factor in consequential damages under the dissipation of assets doctrine for lost shareholder value, and we're looking at $2 billion minimum. The room went silent for about 5 seconds. I thought maybe someone would actually listen. Then Richard shook his head, smiling like I was a child, insisting monsters lived in the closet. This is exactly the problem. Theoretical catastrophes, hypothetical scenarios built on assumptions and worst-case thinking. He turned to Stephen. When does Vertex close? Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. And have their lawyers raised any red flags about the Section 12 issue? Stephen glanced at me, then back at Richard. No, they haven't. Right, because it's not actually a problem. It's Edward finding patterns in the wallpaper. Richard closed my personnel file with a decisive snap. Here's what's happening. Vertex closes tomorrow as planned. This deal has been 6 months in the making, and we're not blowing it up because of theoretical concerns. He turned those cold eyes on me. And Edward, you're taking some paid leave, 2 weeks effective immediately. Rest up. Think about whether this role is really the right fit for your talents. Paid leave. The words might as well have been, you're fired, we're just being polite about it. Everyone in that room knew the script. Paid leave, then a performance improvement plan, then a generous exit package and a non-disclosure agreement. Maria tried one last time. Richard, I really think we should at least have Edward present his full analysis. Meeting's over. Richard was already gathizing his materials. We've got a transformational acquisition closing in the morning. Let's stay focused on what actually moves this company forward. I walked out of that conference room knowing 3 things with absolute certainty. First, my career at Pinnacle was finished. Second, Richard Dawson was going to close the Vertex deal despite my warnings. And third, when that deal exploded exactly the way I'd predicted, they were going to need someone to blame. I went back to my office and stared at the Vertex documents still glowing on my screen. All that conflicting language highlighted in yellow, the revenue discrepancies I'd flagged in red, the mathematical certainty of disaster spelled out in my analysis. Maria, he appeared in my doorway. 10 minutes later, he looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past hour. I'm so sorry, Edward. You made an attempt. I appreciate it. He's been building a case against you since his first week. High-cost position, difficult to quantify output on a spread heat. You were always going to be his first target. He closed the door and sat down. What are you going to do? I was already opening a new email. I'm going to document exactly what I found, exactly when I found it, and exactly what I recommended. Then I'm going to send it to everyone who needs to see it. Will that help? It'll create a paper trail. When this deal goes sideways, at least this will be proof I saw it coming. The email took me 2 hours to write. Every word mattered. I couldn't sound emotional, couldn't sound like I was trying to sabotage the deal out of spite. I had to be clinical, factual, professional. Section references, risk analysis, dollar exposure calculations timeline. Of when I'd flagged these issues recommended action, which was simple and clear delay, closing by 72 hours, and have independent counsel review the specific language conflicts. I sent it to Stephen, cross-copied Richard Dawson, Maria, and Pinnacle's general counsel, Jason Cole. Then I sat staring at the sent confirmation knowing it wouldn't change anything. Richard's response came 18 minutes later. 2 sentences that would eventually cost him his career. Noted closing proceeds as scheduled. I forwarded the entire email chain to my personal account. Then I forwarded every Uthis email I'd sent about Vertex over the past 6 weeks. Every warning, every analysis, every flag I'd raised, 14 documents total, all timestamped, all showing I'd been screaming about this problem while everyone else covered their ears. My phone buzzed, Elena calling. How did it go? His voice was hopeful. He knew I'd been preparing for this meeting all week. I'll tell you when I get home. Edward, what happened? Paid leave 2 weeks. He's setting up for termination. Silence on the Othis end. Then I'm sorry, come home. We'll figure this out. But I couldn't sleep that night. I kept running through the Vertex documents in my mind, checking my math, questioning my analysis. What if I was wrong? What if this was the one time I'd seen patterns that didn't exist? Maybe that's why Richard saw me as expendable. Maybe I'd become the analyst who cried wolf. At 2 in the morning, I was at the kitchen table with my laptop rechecking the revenue classification discrepancies for the 40th time. The numbers didn't lie. Vertex was misrepresenting their financials. The earnout was going to fail. The indemnification language and breach of fiduciary duty was going to crush Pinnacle. Elena found me eyes red from staring at the screen. You've checked this how many times? I don't know anymore. A lot. And every single time. What did you find? The same problem. He pulled up a chair next to me. Then you did your job. You warned them. You documented it. Whatever happens now, that's on them, not you. But it didn't feel that way. When you're good at what you do, the responsibility doesn't end just because someone else makes the final call. The next morning, I didn't go into the office. My forced leave had started, which meant I wasn't supposed to check my work email. I checked it anyway. At 7:45, I started refreshing my inbox obsessively. 8 Donna Steven and now the company-wide announcement hit. Pinnacle Holdings is pleased to announce the successful closing of our acquisition of Vertex Solutions. This transformative deal positions us at the forefront of data analytics and financial technology integration. The deal was done. The countdown had started. Elena made breakfast. Oliver asked why I was home on a weekday. Sophia wanted me to read to this. I went through the motions, but my mind was calculating timelines. It would take at least 2 weeks for Pinnacle's finance team to start the serious integration work, and this week or two before they'd try to reconcile Vertex's revenue reporting with standard accounting practices. Maybe a month before the discrepancies became undeniable. Maybe 2 months before Vertex's lawyers started making noise about the earnout. I had time to update my resume, time to start looking for my next position, time to pretend this wasn't eating me alive. By day 2 of my forced leave, I'd made my decision. I called Maria at 9 in the morning. I'm resigning. Dead silence. Then Edward, no, don't do anything rash. You're on paid leave. You're still getting your salary. Just write it out for 2 weeks and we'll figure out what comes next. I know what comes next. Richard fires me and controls the narrative. He makes it look like I was terminated for cause, for being difficult, for not being a team player. I become the analyst who couldn't adapt to new leadership. I'd been thinking about this all night. He's going to fire me anyway, Maria. You know it. I know it. This way, I leave on my terms with my resignation letter, saying exactly what I wanted to say. What about your salary, your benefits? Edward, you've got 2 kids and a mortgage. I've also got documentation that I warned this company about a multi-billion-dollar disaster and was completely ignored. When Vertex blows up, that documentation is worth more than 2 weeks of salary. Maria was quiet for a long moment. You're sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. I wrote the resignation email that afternoon. It took me an hour to get the tone right. Professional, cordial, brief, effective immediately. I'm resigning from my position as senior compliance analyst. Thank you for the opportunities over the past 6 years. I wish Pinnacle continued success. I sent it to HR, copied Maria and Stephen Brooks. I deliberately didn't copy Richard Dawson. Let him find out through the grapevine. Let him think he'd won. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called an employment lawyer. His name was Simon Pacheco, and he came highly recommended by a recruiter I'd worked with before. I got his assistant first, explained I needed urgent consultation. Somehow they fit me in for a call at 3 that afternoon. Tell me everything, Diana said. When we connected, I walked his through the whole story. The Vertex acquisition, the clause conflict I'd identified, the revenue reporting discrepancies, Richard's dismissal of my warnings, the forced paid leave, my resignation that morning. When I finished, Diana was quiet for maybe 10 seconds. Do you have documentation of your warnings? Every email, every analysis, every risk assessment, all timestamped, all sent to the appropriate people, and their responses. Richard's response to my final warning was 2 sentences. Noted. Closing proceeds is scheduled. I heard his exhale. Edward, you just made the smartest decision of your career by resigning. If this situation develops the way you think it will, Pinnacle's going to be desperate to assign blame. As a current employee, you'd be vulnerable. As a former employee with bulletproof documentation that you identified and properly escalated the risk, you're protected. More than that, you're valuable. Valuable how? When the disaster hits, they're going to need your expertise to dig themselves out. And when they come calling, and they will come calling, we're going to make sure you're properly compensated and completely indemnified from any liability. You sound very confident this is going to blow up. You sound very confident in your analysis. Are you wrong? I thought about those numbers, those clauses, that mathematical certainty I'd been living with for weeks. No, I'm not wrong. Then we prepare. Forward me every document you have related to Vertex. Every email, every analysis, every presentation. I want timestamps on everything. We're going to build a file that makes it crystal clear. You did everything right. I spent the next 4 hours forwarding documents to Diana. When I was done, I had a folder with 23 files. Every warning, every flag, every recommendation. A complete paper trail of competence ignored. Diana called me back that evening. This is excellent documentation. You've protected yourself beautifully. Now we wait. Elena wasn't entirely on board with my resignation. We needed that income. I know, but I couldn't sit this on forced leave waiting for the axe to fall. I'll find something else. The market's good for senior compliance analysts right now. I'd already had 2 recruiters reach out based on my LinkedIn activity. He pulled me close. I trust you. I just don't want these people to hurt you any more than they already have. Too late for that. But I can control what happens next. The first week after my resignation was surreal. I actually showed up to Oliver's debate practice. I took Sophia to a follow-up doctor's appointment without rescheduling 3 times. I cooked dinner every night. Elena kept saying I seemed lighter, less stressed, but underneath everything, I was waiting for the Othis shoe to drop. Welcome to the Payback Office channel. Wise doing the right thing sometimes means standing completely alone. If you're invested in how this plays out, subscribe and help us reach 9,000 subscribers. Maria called me on day 8 after my resignation. How are you holding up? Better than expected. Sleeping more. Actually seeing my kids. How's everything this? Tense. Richard's on a rampage with his efficiency initiatives. He eliminated 3 more positions this week, all high salary roles. He's making a name for himself as the guy who cuts costs. He paused. He hasn't mentioned your resignation once. It's like you never existed. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. 6 years of excellent work erased in 3 weeks by a new executive with something to prove. Has anything come up with the Vertex integration? I asked, knowing I shouldn't. Edward, you don't work He's anymore. You really shouldn't be thinking about this. Maria, please, he said. Integration starts next week. Finance is beginning the preliminary reconciliation work. Everything looks fine so far, but it's early. So far, those were the operative words. The bomb was still ticking, countdown invisible but inevitable. I updated my resume that week. It felt like defeat, but it was also practical. I talked to 3 different recruiters. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Senior compliance analysts with your track record are in massive demand right now. One told me enthusiastically, especially with experience in large-scale acquisitions. You could probably command 900,000, maybe push for $1 million at the right firm. The numbers should have excited me. They felt empty. I had interviews lined up with 2 different firms. Both seemed promising. Both were interested in my experience preventing deal disasters. I didn't mention that my most recent attempt at preventing disaster had gotten me laughed out of a conference room. On the Saturday that marked exactly 2 weeks since the Vertex closing, my phone rang at 8:00 in the morning. Maria, his voice was shaking so badly I almost couldn't understand this. Edward, oh my God, you were right. You were completely right about everything. My heart started pounding. I walked out of the kitchen. Weiss Elena was making pancakes with the kids. Tell me what happened. Vertex's quarterly financial reports came in yesterday. The revenue recognition issue you flagged, it's catastrophic. They've been systematically misclassifying contract revenue for 18 months. One-time project fees categorized as recurring subscriptions. Implementation charges listed as ongoing service revenue. When our finance team started applying standard accounting practices for the integration, nothing reconciled. We're talking about hundreds of millions in revenue that doesn't actually exist the way they reported it. I sat down on the couch, legs suddenly weak. What about the earn-out clause? Maria's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Their lawyers sent a formal demand letter this morning. They're claiming we deliberately interfered with their operations during the integration transition, which caused the revenue discrepancies to surface and destroyed their earn-out value. They're citing the exact indemnification language and breach of fiduciary duty you referenced. Edward, they're demanding $2.1 billion in damages. $2.1 billion, the number I'd calculated, the nightmare scenario I'd warned regarding this matter, the disaster everyone had ignored. Wise as Richard right now. Emergency board meeting started at 6:00 this morning, Stevens and Thies. Jason from legal outside counsel. Everyone's trying to figure out how this happened and how fight it. Has my name come up? Maria hesitated just long enough to confirm my suspicions. Stephen asked if anyone had flagged concerns about the deal structure before closing. Richard tried to downplay it, said, You were always finding theoretical problems that never panned out. But Stephen pudged back. He remembered your email. He asked to see the documentation. Thighs is plenty of documentation. I know, Edward. Listen to me. Richard's going to try to spin this. He's going to try to make it seem like your warnings were vague or incomplete or not properly escalated. The board is asking hard questions about why this deal closed if Thesey were identified risks. Richard's under serious pressure. You need to be ready. I have a lawyer. Good. Don't talk to anyone from Pinnacle without his present. Don't respond to any emails. Don't take any calls, because if they're looking for someone to blame, they'll come after you. I called Diana immediately. He answered on the second ring, even though it was Saturday morning. It happened, I said. Vertex. Everything I predicted. They're claiming $2.1 billion. Send me any communications you receive from Pinnacle. Every email, every voicemail, every text message. Don't respond to anything without my explicit approval. By Monday morning, my inbox was flooded. Stephen Brooks trying to reach me, Jason Cole from legal wanting to schedule a call, someone from HR with a vague subject line about consulting opportunities. Even Richard sent an email. Need to discuss Vertex matter urgently. I forwarded every single message to Diana and didn't respond to any of them. Tuesday afternoon, Diana called with an update. I just spent 90 minutes on the phone with Jason Cole. Pinnacle wants to bring you back. As what a scapegoat as a consultant, they need your expertise to build their defense against Vertex's claim. You know the deal structure better than anyone. You identified the issues before closing. You understand the revenue discrepancies. They need you to walk their legal team through everything so they can mount an effective defense. The irony was almost funny. 2 weeks ago, Richard was mocking my salary and pushing me out. Now they want my help. Now they're desperate. And he's what makes this interesting. The board is asking pointed questions about the decision-making process. Why did this deal close despite identified risks? Who made that final call? Richard's feeling heat from above. Before we even consider you helping them, we need terms that protect you completely and make your role in this situation absolutely clear. What kind of terms? Full indemnification from any liability related to Quantum Ridge. An independent consulting rate that reflects your actual value. I'm thinking 15,000 per day. And most importantly, any official response to Vertex's claim must include a detailed timeline establishing that you identified these risks, properly escalated your concerns, and were overruled. You're not the person who caused this disaster. You're the person who tried to prevent it. That needs to be documented in writing and included in their legal response. Over the next 5 days, Diana negotiated with Pinnacle's legal team. Every term I'd outlined, every protection I needed, every piece of the narrative that established my warnings and their decision to ignore those warnings. They agreed to everything. They had no choice. They were staring down a $2 billion claim, and I was the only person who understood the full scope of the problem. Elena wasn't sure it was the right move. You could just walk away, take one of those other job offers, let them clean up their own mess. I could, I admitted, but $2 billion doesn't just hurt Richard Dawson. It hurts every single person who works at Pinnacle, Maria, Stephen, the analysts, and assistants in operations, people who had nothing to do with ignoring my warnings. If I can help limit the damage, shouldn't I? He studied my face for a long moment. You're better than they deserve. Maybe, but this isn't about what they deserve. It's about doing what's right and making absolutely certain that everyone knows I was right from the beginning. I walked back into Pinnacle's offices on a Thursday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Richard Dawson had laughed at my salary and questioned my value. The atmosphere was completely different, quiet, tense, afraid. Everyone knew about the Vertex claim by now. Everyone knew the company was facing potential catastrophe. Jason Cole met me in the lobby personally. He was mid-50s, gray hair, deep circles under his eyes. Edward, thank you for agreeing to help us. Wise do we start? Conference room and now. We have the full deal team assembled plus outside counsel from Morrison and Flectus. We need you to walk everyone through your analysis. The conference room was packed, Stephen Brooks looking exhausted, Maria giving me a small grateful smile. 3 lawyers. I didn't recognize in expensive suits, and Richard Dawson sitting at the far end of the table staring at his notepad like it held the secrets of the universe. Jason opened the meeting with practiced efficiency. Everyone highs understands our situation. Vertex Solutions is alleging that Pinnacle deliberately interfered with their post-acquisition operations, causing their earnout performance metrics to fail. They're claiming $2.1 billion in damages under the indemnification clause. We have 60 days to file our response before this proceeds to formal litigation. He gestured toward me. Edward Vance identified significant issues with the earnout structure and indemnification language, and breach of fiduciary duty prior to closing. We need to understand exactly what he found, when he found it, and how that information was communicated. Every eye in the room turned to me. Richard still wouldn't look up from his notepad. I opened my laptop and pulled up the analysis I'd prepared. I'll start with the complete timeline. For the next 2 hours, I walked them through everything with surgical precision. The initial contract review wise, I'd first noticed the problematic language in Section 12, the deep dive into Vertex's historical financial filings that revealed inconsistencies in their revenue recognition methodology, the conflicting structure between earnout performance triggers and indemnification liability allocation, the 3 separate emails I'd sent to the deal team flagging these concerns, the formal risk assessment presentation I delivered 4 weeks before closing, and finally, my last comprehensive email sent 18 hours before closing, laying out the potential exposure in exact detail. One of the outside lawyers, a sharp-eyed man named Amanda Price, stopped me. This final email you sent the day before closing. Who received it and who responded? I sent it to Stephen Brooks, copied Richard Dawson, Maria Reeves, and Jason Cole. Richard Dawson responded. Amandane turned his attention to Richard. Mr. Sterling, what was the nature of your response? Richard's voice was flat, stripped of all the confidence he'd had in that conference room 3 weeks ago. I acknowledged receipt of Edward's concerns and made the determination that closing should proceed as scheduled. On what basis did you make that determination? The silence stretched out for several seconds. Amandane pressed forward. Did you consult with additional legal counsel specifically about the issues Edward raised? Did you have another senior analyst independently verify his findings? Did you conduct any supplementary due diligence on the revenue recognition concerns? I relied on the work product from the outside counsel and advisory firms who had already reviewed the deal documentation. Did you specifically ask any of those outside parties to review and address the concerns Edward had identified? Richard's jaw tightened. No, I did not. Amanda made a careful note. Why not? I made a judgment call that the concerns were theoretical and that furthest delay wasn't warranted given the time and resources already invested in the deal. Amanda turned back to me. Edward, in your professional opinion, based on 6 years of acquisition compliance analysis, was the risk you identified readily discoverable during standard due diligence? I looked directly at Richard for the first time. He still wouldn't meet my eyes. Yes, it required detailed cross-referencing of contract language with actual revenue reporting methodology, but it was absolutely discoverable with appropriate analysis. And in your professional opinion, should this acquisition have closed with the identified language conflicts in place? No. The risk exposure was too significant. At minimum, closing should have been delayed until the conflicting language could be reconciled and the revenue recognition methodology could be independently verified against historical performance. Thank you, Edward. The meeting continued for a nos 0 minutes, but the critical narrative had been established. I had done my job. I had identified the risk. I had escalated appropriately through proper channels. The decision to override those warnings and close the deal anyway sat entirely with Richard Dawson. When the meeting finally ended, people filed out in subdued silence. Richard left first, head down, not speaking to anyone. Maria caught my arm in the hallway. That was brutal to watch. That was factual documentation of what actually happened. Theses already talk about major layoffs. If we can't settle this claim or get it significantly reduced, he didn't need to finish the sentence. $2 billion would destroy Pinnacle completely. Over the following 10 weeks, I became Pinnacle's most critical asset. I worked closely with Amanda and the Morrison and Fletch's legal team to construct a comprehensive defense strategy. The core argument was elegantly simple. Vertex had fundamentally misrepresented their financial position from the very beginning of acquisition discussions. The earnout failure wasn't the result of any action Pinnacle had taken post-acquisition. It was the inevitable result of Vertex's pre-acquisition financials being built on aggressive accounting practices that couldn't survive standard reconciliation. To prove that thesis, we had to reconstruct Vertex's entire revenue history from the ground up. I spent weeks analyzing every contract they'd executed over the past 3 years, every customer agreement, every revenue recognition policy, every financial statement. The deeper I dug, the worse it looked for Vertex. They hadn't just been careless with their accounting. They'd been systematically aggressive, deliberately reclassifying revenue types to create the appearance of predictable recurring revenue growth. One-time project fees became subscription revenue. Implementation charges became ongoing services. Contract modifications became expansions that inflated growth metrics. When Pinnacle's finance team had begun applying generally accepted accounting principles during integration, the house of cards collapsed. The real numbers told a completely different story. Vertex was worth perhaps 60% of what Pinnacle had paid. Amanda used my exhaustive analysis to completely flip the narrative. Pinnacle wasn't the party in breach of the acquisition agreement. Vertex was. They had committed fraud in the inducement by systematically misrepresenting their financial performance to inflate the acquisition price. The earnout failure was a direct, inevitable consequence of that underlying fraud. Pinnacle filed their formal responses in mid-December along with a substantial counterclaim for fraudulent inducement and WARN Act violations, breach of contract, and breach of representations and warranties. The reaction from Vertex was swift and telling. Within 6 days, their counsel reached out to discuss potential settlement. The settlement negotiations took nearly 2 months, but the final agreement came together in late February. Vertex completely withdrew their $2.1 billion claim. Pinnacle agreed to a restructured earnout with dramatically lower performance targets that actually reflected Vertex's legitimate revenue potential. No additional money changed hands beyond the original acquisition price. Both parties agreed to strict confidentiality terms. It wasn't a total victory, but it was close enough. Pinnacle survived barely. Richard Dawson's resignation was announced in early March. The carefully worded board statement mentioned pursuing of this opportunities and mutual agreement. Everyone who could read between corporate lines knew exactly what had happened. Jason Cole called me into his office the morning after Richard's resignation became public. "We want you to come back permanently," he said without preamble. "Senior Vice President of Risk Management and Compliance. You'd have oversight authority for all major deal analysis, all acquisition due diligence, all compliance review for significant transactions, direct reporting line to me and the board, 1.22 million salary plus substantial equity stake." It was more money than I'd ever imagined earning. It was the recognition I'd wanted for my entire career. It was validation that my expertise mattered.